How did I generate an average of 500 registrants for several webinars during the pandemic? And what lessons did I learn from that experience? Let's talk about it. Hello, Jeremy here, and welcome back to another video. For this video, this is for my content marketers out there, and really anybody that's interested in kind of the webinar format and creating content. So during the pandemic, I hosted a series of webinars that generated an average of 500 registrants per webinar. How did I actually do that? Well, to tell you how I did that, we have to go back in time a little bit before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, I was actually organizing in-person meetups. And so I was able to build a network and build, a relatively small community, but growing community. And for those in-person meetups, I was averaging anywhere from 50 to 100 registrants. And of course, there's about a 30% drop off in terms of people actually attending. And obviously, the pandemic hit us, and so everything in person completely stopped, and we had to transition everything to the online world. Luckily, there's amazing technologies out there, Zoom, Hopin, Crowdcast, and also some legacy platforms like WebEx or GoToWebinar and On24. There's a plethora of solid platforms to use to run your webinars. But this isn't a video about webinar platforms and which one to go with. This video is about how did I average 500 registrants per webinar during the pandemic. So as I mentioned, the in-person meetups, I was doing those meetups with a partner, and this partner opened up their office space and allowed me to use their space as my kind of go-to venue for my meetups. So first and foremost, that was really useful because if you've ever tried to organize an in-person meetup, if you don't have venue space, good luck. So let me take a step back and give you 3 lessons that I learned making that transition from the meetup world, in-person meetup world, to the online world. Lesson number 1, create a webinar series. If you've ever attended a webinar, usually it's kind of a one-off deal, right? There's a topic. The webinar happens, you get the recording afterwards, and you go about your day until the next webinar comes around, until it's a new topic that the speaker or speakers or company that's hosting the webinar wants to talk about. But a series is a little bit more powerful, and here's why. A, you're able to create some consistency. As a content creator, having that consistency and being able to know the format and all the other details of the webinar because you're doing it on a consistent basis because it's a series, that takes a lot of lift off of your shoulders. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And B, it sets expectations for your audience. If you have a series and you're consistently doing this series, your audience is conditioned to have a certain level of expectation with that particular series. They essentially know what they're going to get. It's very similar to a episodic show. Let's take Game of Thrones, for example. If Game of Thrones was a movie, it probably would be an epic movie. People would flock to the movie theaters and watch it and wait for it to come on a platform like Netflix or HBO Max and all the plethora of other streaming platforms out there. It would be epic. People would love it. But because it's episodic, you become conditioned to wait for the next episode, right? And storytellers and creators who are working on that show know how to keep their audience on the edge of their seat, right? Just when you think you have figured out the story, something changes, or when you're waiting for something to happen, it abruptly ends. You have to wait till the next episode to actually see what happened the previous episode. It's just some various techniques out there that really keep you glued into the show. But as these episodes come out, you start getting conditioned and you have expectations that you've set for the show. And so you start looking forward to it. And that's why at the end, the season finale, if it's a good show, you have that feeling of, what now? What next? I'm crushed because I love the show and now it's over. The same concept can be applied to a webinar series. If you're creating a series that's cohesive, has a cohesive story, attendees are able to follow along. You're able to condition them to look for the next episode in your webinar series. So you're basically building on top of each webinar that you launch. And so that was a very important lesson that I learned. And the series that I was organizing was called Breaking into Social Impact. Essentially, it was a panel of social impact professionals, and I would pepper them with questions about how they got into the career. What do they like about the career? What advice would they give somebody that's interested in breaking into the profession? And all the attendees that came out or registered for the webinar, they were in the nonprofit sector. They were individuals who had other professions, but they were all looking to break into social impact. Hence the name of the webinar series, Breaking into Social Impact. And so that leads me into my second lesson. Be consistent. And inherently, when you have a series, you're able to be consistent. But consistency comes in the form of having a regular cadence, whether it's every week, every other week, every month, every quarter, whatever it is, you want to consistently do it. Because again, you're conditioning your audience to have a certain level of expectations. So if you do a webinar every single month and it's a series, it builds on top of each other, they're going to start expecting it every single month. And you have to deliver. As a content creator that's doing these webinars, you have to deliver on essentially that promise. And lesson number 3, find the right partner. So I mentioned the partner that I have been working with over the years for live meetups. When we made the transition over to the online world, essentially we were still working together on webinars. And they had and still have a much larger community and database than I have, but it was a mutually beneficial relationship. And actually, this is a bonus lesson. If you're going to form a partnership, which I highly recommend when it comes to content creation, find a company or a person that you can team up with. You want the relationship to be mutually beneficial. So you have to find a way to demonstrate the value that you can give them and vice versa. And then you find common ground, and then you put on a series where you're both partnering on it, and there you go. You're able to piggyback off of each other. It's co-marketing, getting more eyeballs and awareness on the actual webinar series, and that alone is going to help you boost up your registration numbers. When you combine those 3 lessons, you have a webinar series, you're consistent with it, a consistent format, a consistent cadence, and so on and so forth, and you marry that with the right partner, that is what's going to boost your registration numbers. That's what happened to me. So now my hope for you is that one, if not all these lessons resonated with you, and you take them and you apply it to your own webinar strategy. But now over to you. I'm very curious. Have you ever had any type of episodic content, whether it was a webinar series or a podcast, or even some type of series on your blog? Have you ever done that? And if so, what were the results? What did you learn from that experience? Let me know in the comments. With that, thank you so much for watching.